The town of Ellerton, Georgia hadn't seen a new face in nearly 3 years when Reverend Thomas Webb arrived that humid June morning in 1905. The southern heat pressed down on his black suit as he stepped off the train, Bible clutched tightly in one hand, a worn leather suitcase in the other. Ellerton was small, barely 400 souls, with a single church perched on a slight rise overlooking Main Street. "You must be our new shepherd," a voice called as Thomas descended the platform steps. A man with a salt-and-pepper beard and kind eyes approached, hand extended. "Walter Mason, I chair the church committee." They shook hands firmly. "Pleasure, Mr. Mason. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Call me Walter, please. We're all neighbors here." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "My wife and I have prepared the parsonage. It's modest but comfortable." As they walked through town, Thomas noticed the curious stares from storekeepers and townsfolk. Ellerton appeared prosperous enough, the storefronts freshly painted, the streets relatively clean, but something felt off. The children didn't play in the streets as they did in other small towns he'd visited. Women hurried about their errands with downcast eyes. The previous minister, Reverend Grayson, he left rather suddenly. "I understand," Thomas ventured. Walter's pace slowed imperceptibly. "Yes, his health deteriorated. This climate doesn't agree with everyone." The parsonage sat behind the church, a two-story white-clappered structure with a sagging porch. As they approached, Thomas spotted a figure watching from an upstairs window of the grand house on the neighboring hill, a woman, her face pale against the glass. "That's Mason Hill," Walter said, noticing Thomas's gaze. "My family home. My wife Rebecca and I live there with our daughter Sarah." "Quite impressive," Thomas remarked. Walter nodded. "Been in the family for 3 generations. We're blessed." He handed Thomas the key to the parsonage. "Sunday service is at 10. The congregation is eager to meet you." As Walter departed, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong in Ellerton. Perhaps it was just the unfamiliarity of a new place. Or perhaps it was the way Walter's voice had wavered when speaking of the previous minister. That night, as Thomas unpacked his meager belongings, he heard it soft and distant at first, then clearer, singing. A hymn he recognized, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." It seemed to float up from somewhere below, the voices harmonizing with practiced precision. He moved to the window, looking toward Mason Hill. Lights shone from the basement windows, shadows moving within. The singing stopped abruptly. Thomas watched as several figures emerged from a side door of the Mason home, dispersing quickly into the night. Among them he recognized Walter Mason, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a great burden. Thomas slept poorly that night, dreams plagued by faceless children singing hymns in darkness. The church filled quickly that Sunday morning. Thomas stood at the pulpit, surveying the faces before him, solemn, expectant, guarded. Walter and Rebecca Mason occupied the front pew, their daughter Sarah beside them. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, her blonde hair pulled back severely, hands folded in her lap. Thomas delivered a sermon on community and trust, watching his congregation's reactions carefully. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably when he spoke of secrets corroding the soul. Throughout, Walter Mason's gaze never wavered, his expression unreadable. After the service, Thomas stood at the door, shaking hands with his new flock. When Rebecca Mason approached, he noticed her trembling fingers. "A lovely sermon, Reverend," she said softly. Her eyes darted nervously to her husband, who stood conversing with other church members nearby. Thank you, Mrs. Mason. I hope to get to know everyone better in the coming weeks." "Yes, well, ... quotes." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Ellerton has its ways, Reverend. Some traditions run deep." Before Thomas could inquire further, Walter appeared at his wife's side. "Rebecca, Sarah's waiting in the carriage." His tone was gentle but firm. As the Masons departed, an elderly woman grasped Thomas's arm. "You seem like a good man, Reverend," she whispered. "Don't go asking questions nobody wants to answer." She shuffled away before he could respond. That afternoon, Thomas visited the town's small cemetery behind the church. Walking among the gravestones, he noticed something peculiar, a disproportionate number of children's graves. Some families had lost 3 or 4 children within weeks of each other. Most disturbingly, many deaths had occurred in the same month across different years. June, this month. One name appeared repeatedly on these small markers: Mason. The family had lost children for generations, it seemed. Yet they remained prominent, respected. As dusk fell, Thomas returned to the parsonage, his mind troubled. He was startled to find Sarah Mason sitting on his porch steps. "Miss Mason," he said, removing his hat. "Is everything all right?" She looked up, her blue eyes rimmed with red. "You don't understand what happens here," she said, her voice barely audible. "Nobody does until it's too late." "What do you mean?" Thomas took a seat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "They'll be watching you, testing you." She stood abruptly. "If you hear the singing, don't follow it, please." Before he could question her further, she darted away, disappearing around the side of the church toward Mason Hill. That night, the singing came again. Louder this time, more voices joined in harmony. Thomas stood at his window watching as lights glowed from the Mason house basement. He counted at least a dozen people entering through the side door. What kind of prayer meeting happens in a basement at midnight? And why did Sarah warn him against it? He considered investigating, but remembered her pleading eyes. Instead, he opened his Bible, trying to drown out the distant hymns with his own whispered prayers. The singing continued for nearly an hour before silence fell once more over Ellerton. Over the next week, Thomas immersed himself in the life of Ellerton. He visited the general store, the small schoolhouse, and several parishioners' homes. Everywhere, he was met with the same polite reserve. Conversations flowed easily until he mentioned the Mason family or the previous minister. Then silence fell like a heavy curtain. At the general store, Thomas struck up a conversation with the proprietor, a jovial man named Henry Collins. "Settling in all right, Reverend?" Henry asked as he measured coffee beans. "Yes, though I admit I'm still learning Ellerton's ways." Thomas leaned closer. "Tell me, what do you know about the Masons? They seem quite influential." Henry's smile faltered. "Good people. Walter's grandfather built half this town. The family's had its share of tragedy, but they've always been generous. I noticed many children's graves in the cemetery." "Was there an epidemic?" The store fell silent, other customers turning to stare. Henry's voice dropped to a whisper. "We don't discuss such things, Reverend. Not here." As Thomas left the store, an old man followed him out. Thomas recognized him from church, Samuel Jenkins, who'd farmed outside town for decades. "You're asking dangerous questions, Reverend," Samuel said, falling into step beside him. "I'm merely trying to understand my congregation." Samuel glanced around nervously. "Meet me tomorrow at sundown. My farm, North Road, 3 miles out. I'll tell you what I know." He hurried away before Thomas could respond. That afternoon, Thomas received an unexpected visitor at the parsonage, Dr. William Harris, Ellerton's physician. "Just a social call," Dr. Harris explained, settling into a chair. "Wanted to make sure you're in good health. The previous minister suffered terribly toward the end." "What exactly ailed Reverend Grayson?" Thomas asked. Dr. Harris studied his hands. "Nervous condition." He began making accusations, disturbing claims about respected townsfolk. Eventually, he couldn't distinguish reality from fantasy, and before him, Reverend Porter left for similar reasons. Its peculiar ministers seemed susceptible to melancholy in Ellerton. Dr. Harris leaned forward. I've prepared a tonic for sleeplessness. The nights can be unsettling here." Thomas declined the offered bottle. "I sleep quite soundly, thank you." The doctor's smile tightened. "Very well. But should you begin hearing or seeing things, unusual things, please consult me immediately." After Dr. Harris departed, Thomas pondered his warning. The physician clearly knew about the nighttime gatherings, but positioned them as hallucinations. Why? That evening, Thomas decided to visit Mason Hill. He needed to speak with Walter directly, away from the watchful eyes of the congregation. The mansion loomed against the darkening sky as Thomas approached. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Rebecca Mason stood there, looking startled. "Reverend Webb, we weren't expecting you." "My apologies for the intrusion. Is your husband available?" "He's indisposed at present." "Perhaps you could return tomorrow?" Her eyes kept darting to a closed door behind her. From somewhere deep in the house came the sound of breaking glass, followed by a child's cry, weakly muffled. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Mason?" Thomas stepped forward instinctively. Rebecca blocked his path. "Perfectly fine. Sarah dropped a dish, that's all." Her smile was brittle. "Please, Reverend, tomorrow would be better." As Thomas reluctantly turned to leave, he glimpsed Sarah watching from the staircase, her expression one of silent warning. Walking back to the parsonage, Thomas heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he caught sight of a figure ducking between buildings. Someone was following him. The night brought more singing from Mason Hill, louder, more fervent. Thomas lay awake, listening, wondering what awaited him at Samuel Jenkins' farm the next day. The Jenkins farm stood in stark contrast to the prosperity of Ellerton, fences sagging, fields only partially planted. Thomas tied his horse to a weathered post and approached the small farmhouse. Samuel emerged before he reached the door. "Not here," the old man said tersely. "The barn." Inside the musty barn, Samuel lit a lantern and hung it from a beam. His weathered face looked haunted in the flickering light. "What I'm about to tell you, Reverend, I've never spoken aloud. Not in 63 years. His hands shook as he lowered himself onto a hay bale. "I was just a boy when it started. Dayton 42. There was a drought, crops failed, children sickened and died. The Masons lost 3 that summer. Thomas sat opposite him, listening intently. Josiah Mason Walter's grandfather was desperate. He'd lost 2 sons and a daughter. His wife was inconsolable. Samuel paused, swallowing hard. One night he gathered the town elders in his basement. They prayed for deliverance, for rain, for an end to the sickness. A prayer meeting, Thomas said, like the ones they still hold. Samuel's laugh was bitter. Not just prayers, Reverend. Josiah had traveled extensively, brought back ... ideas, old ways. They sacrificed a lamb that night, mingled its blood with wine. Thomas frowned. Pagan rituals. The rain came the next day. Children stopped dying except one, the Wilsons' youngest, found dead in their well. Samuel leaned closer. After that, Josiah convinced them, 1 child each June to ensure prosperity for all. Thomas recoiled. You can't possibly mean. I do. Always a child already sick or injured. Always a family struggling financially. The Masons would offer help, money, land protection. In exchange, ... His voice trailed off. That's monstrous. Surely you don't believe I've seen it, Reverend. Year after year, 1 child dies, the town thrives. The prayers, the singing, it's all for show. To make it seem holy. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. My sister was chosen in 46. I watched them take her. Thomas shook his head. If what you're saying is true, why hasn't anyone stopped it? Contacted authorities? Those who tried disappeared, or were found dead accidents, they called them. Samuel gripped Thomas's arm. 3 ministers before you figured it out. 1 fled. 2 died. As Thomas rode back toward town, his mind reeled. Samuel's tale seemed too horrific to believe, yet it explained the town's prosperity despite regional hardships, the children's graves, the midnight gatherings. Still, human sacrifice in modern America, impossible. He needed evidence, not just one old man's claims. As the church came into view, Thomas noticed unusual activity at Mason Hill, carriages arriving, people hurrying inside. Another midnight gathering, but it was barely dusk. Thomas stabled his horse and moved cautiously toward the mansion, staying hidden among the trees. From this vantage point, he could see into the basement through a narrow window. People stood in a circle, Walter Mason at its center, reading from what appeared to be a Bible. Normal enough, except for what lay on the table beside him, gleaming metal instruments. A door opened, and Rebecca entered, leading a small boy by the hand, perhaps 5 years old, thin and pale. Thomas recognized him as Michael Turner, whose family had recently lost their farm to creditors. The realization struck Thomas like physical blow. This wasn't mere superstition, it was evil cloaked in righteousness. He had to act immediately. Thomas raced back to the parsonage, mind racing. He needed help, the sheriff perhaps, or trusted parishioners, but whom could he trust? The entire town might be complicit. Before he could form a plan, a knock came at his door. Thomas opened it cautiously to find Sarah Mason, her face tear-streaked. You went to Jenkins' farm, she said, pushing past him into the house. They know. They're coming for you, Sarah. I saw the boy. Michael Turner. Is what Samuel told me true? She nodded, trembling. It's been happening since before I was born. Father says it's necessary. God's will. 1 life for the many. That's not God's will. That's murder. Thomas paced the small room. We have to stop them. You don't understand. Everyone important in town is involved. Sheriff Mills, Dr. Harris, Judge Collier, they've all benefited. Her voice dropped. The Turners were promised our old farmland and enough money to start over elsewhere, and they agreed to this. They were told Michael would be adopted by a wealthy family up north. They don't know. Sarah wiped her tears. I've tried to stop it before. No one believes me. They say I'm unwell, like Mother. Thomas moved to the window, watching for approaching figures. When will they... When is it happening? Midnight. Always at midnight on the summer solstice. June 21st. Today. The realization hit him like a physical blow. We need to get Michael out of there, Thomas said firmly. The basement has only 1 entrance, through the kitchen. Father keeps it locked. But ... double quotes, Sarah hesitated. I know where he hides the key. Thomas considered their options. If we can rescue Michael and get to the next town, we can bring back help. Greenville is 20 miles south, Sarah said. But they'll come after us. Not if we create a distraction. Thomas grabbed his coat. Wait here. Thomas hurried to the church and unlocked the door. Inside, he climbed the narrow stairs to the bell tower. The church bell was only rung on Sundays and for emergencies, fire mainly. It would bring the town running. Back at the parsonage, he found Sarah waiting anxiously. At 11:30, I'll ring the church bell, he explained. When everyone rushes to see what's happening, you slip into the house and get Michael. Meet me behind the church with him. I'll have horses ready." Sarah nodded, her face resolute. "I should go home now before they notice I'm gone." "Be careful," Thomas warned. "Show no sign of what we're planning." After she left, Thomas prepared for their escape. He packed a small bag with essentials and wrote a hasty letter detailing Samuel's accusations and his own observations, addressing it to the governor. If they failed tonight, perhaps the letter would eventually reach someone who could help. As darkness fell, Thomas watched from his window as more people arrived at Mason Hill. The singing began earlier than usual, a different hymn tonight, more somber. "Abide with me." At 11:15, Thomas slipped out of the parsonage and made his way to the church. The town was eerily quiet, most lights extinguished as residents slept or attended the gathering at Mason Hill. The bell rope hung in the tower like a lifeline. Thomas checked his pocket watch in the moonlight. 11-20-8. Taking a deep breath, he grasped the rope and pulled. The bell's sonorous tone shattered the night's stillness. Thomas rang it continuously, creating a rhythm of urgency. Within minutes, lights appeared in windows. People emerged from homes, looking toward the church in confusion. Most importantly, several figures hurried from Mason Hill, Walter Mason among them. Thomas continued ringing until he saw Sarah slip out from behind the house and dash toward the side entrance. Then he descended quickly, exiting through the church's rear door. Behind the church, 2 horses waited, borrowed without permission from the town's livery stable. Thomas secured his bag and letter, then anxiously watched for Sarah. Minutes passed. The townspeople had discovered the church empty and were now searching the vicinity, calling his name. Thomas remained hidden, heart pounding. Finally, a small figure emerged from the darkness, Sarah, alone. "Where's Michael?" Thomas asked, dread filling him. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They've already started. I couldn't get to him." A cold determination seized Thomas. "Then we stop them now." He turned toward Mason Hill. "No." Sarah grabbed his arm. "There are too many. They'll kill you too." "I can't let them murder a child." Thomas pulled away. "Please," Sarah begged. "We can still reach Greenville. Bring back help." Torn between immediate action and the more pragmatic plan, Thomas hesitated a moment too long. A voice called from nearby. "There he is, by the horses." Sheriff Mills emerged from the shadows, revolver drawn. Behind him stood Walter Mason and Dr. Harris. "Reverend Webb," Walter said calmly, "I'm disappointed." "Sarah, come here, child." Sarah shrank against Thomas. "No, Father." Walter's expression hardened. "You've filled her head with lies, Reverend. Just like Grayson before you." "I saw the boy," Thomas said. "I know what you're doing. What we do for Ellerton, for all of us." Walter stepped forward. "One life freely given to save hundreds." "Freely given?" "He's a child. The parents consent. The child is already dying of tuberculosis in Michael's case. Dr. Harris confirmed it. We merely give meaning to an inevitable death." Thomas shook his head. "You justify murder with lies. This stops tonight." Walter sighed. "I had hoped you might understand, given time. Join us even. We need a strong spiritual leader. I'll never be part of this. Then you leave us no choice." Walter nodded to the sheriff. Sheriff Mills raised his revolver. "You'll come quietly, Reverend. Both of you." Thomas glanced at Sarah, then at the horses. They had one chance. He lunged suddenly, shoving the sheriff aside and pulling Sarah toward the nearest mount. "Run!" he shouted, boosting her into the saddle. A shot rang out. Thomas felt a searing pain in his shoulder but managed to hoist himself onto the second horse. They galloped away as more shots echoed behind them. The road to Greenville stretched before them, moonlit and empty. Yet despite his wound, Thomas pushed on, Sarah beside him. They had to reach help before morning, before the town concocted a story to explain away their accusations. Behind them, the singing had resumed at Mason Hill. Blood soaked Thomas's shirt as they rode through the Georgia night. The bullet had torn through his upper shoulder, missing bone but leaving a ragged, bleeding wound. Each hoofbeat sent waves of pain through his body, but he pressed on. Sarah rode silently beside him, occasionally glancing back toward Ellerton. They'd been riding for nearly an hour when she suddenly pulled up. "They're following us," she whispered, pointing to distant lantern light on the road behind them. Thomas squinted through the darkness. At least 3 riders, moving fast. "They can't afford to let us reach Greenville." "There's another way," Sarah said, "a logging trail through those woods. It's longer but might throw them off." With no better option, they veered off the main road into the dense forest. The trail was barely visible in the moonlight, forcing them to slow their pace. Branches whipped at Thomas's face as they navigated the narrow path. "You've used this trail before?" Thomas asked, fighting to stay conscious. Sarah nodded. "When things became unbearable at home, I'd ride to Greenville, spend a day pretending to be someone else, then return before anyone noticed." "Your father, has he always been involved?" He was born into it, like me. Grandfather explained it to him when he was 12. My father told me when I turned 12 last year. Her voice was hollow. He said I would eventually lead the prayers as the Mason daughter. The enormity of what they were fighting against struck Thomas anew. Not just a ritual, but a generational cult hiding behind respectability and religion. They emerged from the woods onto a secondary road. Thomas's vision blurred, his strength waning from blood loss. How much farther? Another hour, maybe less if we hurry. Sarah eyed his wound worriedly. You need a doctor. We need the law first. Thomas straightened in the saddle, fighting unconsciousness. Sheriff Daniels in Greenville, he's not from around here. Not connected to Ellerton. They pushed their exhausted horses harder. The moon slipped behind clouds, leaving the road in darkness. In the distance, a dog barked, then another, the sound of civilization approaching. Thomas felt himself sliding. His hands, slick with blood, couldn't maintain their grip on the reins. The world tilted sideways as he fell. Sarah dismounted quickly, kneeling beside him. Reverend Webb. Thomas. Go, he managed. Get to Greenville. Tell them, I'm not leaving you. She tore strips from her petticoat, binding his wound tightly. Can you stand? With her help, Thomas regained his feet. The horses were spent, breathing heavily from the hard ride. We'll walk, Sarah decided. It can't be more than a mile now. Thomas leaned heavily on her as they stumbled forward, leading the horses. Each step was agony, but the lights of Greenville grew gradually closer. Behind them, no sign of pursuit. Perhaps they'd lost them in the woods. As they reached the outskirts of town, a man approached on horseback, a night watchman, lantern held high. Help us, Sarah called, please. The watchman drew closer, examining them with suspicion. What happened here? I'm Reverend Thomas Webb from Ellerton, Thomas said weakly. This girl and I need to see Sheriff Daniels immediately. A child's life depends on it. Sheriff's asleep, like decent folk should be. The watchman frowned. And you're bleeding all over the street. Wake him, Thomas insisted. Tell him there's been a shooting and a kidnapping in Ellerton. Perhaps it was the gravity in Thomas's voice or the desperation in Sarah's eyes, but the watchman nodded. Wait here. He rode ahead toward the sheriff's office. Thomas sagged against a hitching post. If they don't believe us, double quotes, they will, Sarah said firmly. They have to. Within minutes, several men approached, the watchman, another deputy, and a barrel-chested man with a star pinned to his nightshirt. I'm Sheriff Daniels, he announced. What's this about a shooting? Thomas straightened as best he could. Sheriff, my name is Thomas Webb. I'm the minister in Ellerton. This is Sarah Mason. We've fled from there tonight because the town leaders are involved in ritual murder. They've taken a boy named Michael Turner. He may still be alive. Daniels stared in disbelief. Ritual murder in Ellerton? My father is Walter Mason, Sarah interjected. He and others, Dr. Harris, Sheriff Mills, Judge Collier, they sacrifice a child every summer solstice. They believe it brings prosperity. It's the most outlandish thing I've ever heard, Daniels scoffed. Walter Mason is one of the most respected men in the county. Then explain this, Thomas pulled aside his bloodied coat. Their sheriff shot me when we tried to stop them. Daniels examined the wound, his expression shifting. Get the doctor, he ordered the deputy. To the watchman, rouse Judge Perry. Tell him it's urgent. As they waited for the doctor, Thomas and Sarah provided details, dates of previous deaths, names of children, locations of graves. Thomas produced his letter, now stained with his blood but still legible. Sheriff Daniels read it carefully. If this is true, and I'm not saying it is, we're talking about half the county's elite being involved in murder. Not half, Sarah corrected. All of them. Everyone with power in Ellerton. The doctor arrived, a young man with kind eyes who immediately began treating Thomas's wound. Bullet went clean through, he reported. He's lucky. Judge Perry appeared shortly after, hastily dressed but alert. Sheriff Daniels explained the situation while the doctor worked. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the judge said after listening. Do you have any proof beyond your word? Thomas, fighting through pain as the doctor stitched his wound, met the judge's gaze steadily. The proof is in Mason Hill's basement, and in the registry of deaths in Ellerton, one child each June, dating back to 1842. There's more, Sarah added quietly. In my father's study, a book, leather-bound with no title. It contains records of every sacrifice. Names, dates, what was promised to each family. Judge Perry and Sheriff Daniels exchanged glances. If what you're saying is true, the judge said slowly, we need to move quickly, but cautiously. These are serious allegations against prominent citizens. I'll gather a posse, Daniels decided. 10 men, armed. We ride for Ellerton within the hour. I'm coming with you, Thomas insisted, trying to stand. The doctor pushed him back down. You've lost too much blood, Reverend. You need rest. He's right, Daniels said. You've done your part. Now let us do ours. Sarah stepped forward. I have to go. You need me to find the book to show you the basement entrance. Judge Perry studied her thoughtfully. How old are you, child? 16, Your Honor. He nodded. Old enough to testify if it comes to that. Sheriff, take her with you, but keep her safe. As preparations were made, Thomas caught Sarah's hand. Be careful. Your father won't give up easily. I know. Her eyes were resolute, but neither will I. Within the hour, Sheriff Daniels had assembled his posse, 10 determined men, plus Sarah. They departed for Ellerton under a sky beginning to lighten with pre-dawn glow. Thomas, despite the doctor's protests, refused to rest. How long until we know something? He asked Judge Perry, who had remained behind. If they ride hard, they'll reach Ellerton by sunrise. After that, he shrugged. Depends on what they find. Thomas closed his eyes, praying it wouldn't be too late for Michael Turner. Sarah rode at the front of the posse beside Sheriff Daniels, guiding them along the main road to Ellerton. The eastern sky had begun to pale, the first birds awakening in the trees around them. We should approach from the north, she advised. Most of the town will be asleep after last night's ceremony. Daniels nodded grimly. What exactly happens at these ceremonies? Sarah swallowed hard. Prayers. Singing. The sacrifice happens at midnight exactly. Then more prayers until dawn. And no one objects? No one tries to stop it? Those who know are either participants or beneficiaries. Those who've objected over the years have disappeared. Her voice dropped, like my mother's sister. She threatened to expose everything when I was small. They found her drowned in the river. Daniels's jaw tightened. Your own father was involved in that? My father believes absolutely in the necessity of what they do. He thinks he's saving the town. Sarah looked away. He's not a monster in his own mind. As they crested a hill, Ellerton came into view, peaceful in the early morning light. Smoke rose lazily from a few chimneys. The church steeple stood tall against the brightening sky. Mason Hill is there, Sarah pointed to the grand house overlooking the town. We should secure it first before anyone can destroy evidence. Daniels divided his men. 6 would accompany him and Sarah to Mason Hill. 4 would go to the sheriff's office to detain Sheriff Mills if he was there. They approached the mansion from the rear, riding through orchards heavy with unripe fruit. No lights shone from the windows, no movement visible. Wait here, Daniels instructed his men as they dismounted. To Sarah, is there a back entrance? She nodded, leading him to a servant's door. It opened silently to her touch. Father never locks this door. He says thieves know better than to steal from a mason. They entered a large kitchen, cold and empty. Sarah moved confidently through the house, Daniels and 2 deputies following, guns drawn. The remaining men surrounded the property. Father's study is upstairs, Sarah whispered. The book will be in his desk. The bottom drawer has a false bottom. They climbed the grand staircase, floorboards creaking beneath their weight. Sarah paused outside a closed door. My parents' bedroom. Daniels motioned for a deputy to guard it while they continued to the study. The room was lined with bookshelves, a massive oak desk dominating the center. Sarah went directly to it, kneeling to open the bottom drawer. She removed several folders, then pressed something inside. A click, and the false bottom lifted. Beneath lay a leather-bound volume, its cover unmarked. Sarah handed it to Daniels wordlessly. He opened it carefully. The first page contained a single line in faded ink. The Covenant of Ellerton. Established June 21, 1842. Subsequent pages detailed each year's offering, the child's name, age, ailment, the family's compensation, and the town's subsequent blessings. The entries were meticulous, matter-of-fact, as if documenting crop yields rather than children's deaths. Daniels's face paled as he read. This goes back over 60 years. 3 generations, Sarah confirmed. My great-grandfather started it during the drought. A noise from the hallway interrupted them, a door opening. Walter Mason stood in the study doorway, dressed in a robe, his expression changing from surprise to cold fury as he registered Sarah's presence. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, ignoring the deputy's drawn gun. Daniels held up the book. Walter Mason, I'm Sheriff Daniels from Greenville. You're under arrest for the murder of, he glanced at the final entry, Michael Turner, and conspiracy to commit multiple murders dating back decades. Walter's laugh was chilling, preposterous. Michael Turner is alive and well, Sheriff. His family decided to leave town suddenly last night, financial troubles, you understand? Sarah, what lies have you been telling? No more lies, Father, Sarah said steadily. I showed them the basement. Walter's composure faltered momentarily. The basement contains nothing but preserves and old furniture. We'll see about that, Daniels nodded to his deputy. Secure him. As the deputy moved forward, Walter lunged suddenly, grabbing a letter opener from the desk and holding it to Sarah's throat. Put down your weapons, he commanded, or my daughter dies today instead of next year. Daniels froze. Next year? Sarah's eyes widened in horror. Walter smiled thinly. Sarah turned 16 last month, the age of consent in Georgia. Next June she would have been our offering voluntarily, of course. The ultimate sacrifice from the Mason family. You're insane, Daniels said, lowering his gun slowly. I am devoted, Walter corrected, as was my father and his father before him. The prosperity of Ellerton demands sacrifice. The letter opener pressed harder against Sarah's skin. Now you will leave my house and forget what you think you know. Or a shot rang out. Walter staggered backward, the letter opener clattering to the floor. Blood bloomed on his robe as he collapsed. In the doorway stood Rebecca Mason, a small revolver in her trembling hand. No more children, she whispered. No more. Sarah ran to her mother, embracing her as the gun fell from Rebecca's grasp. Daniels moved quickly to Walter, checking for a pulse. He's alive. Get the doctor from town, he ordered a deputy, who hurried out. The basement, Rebecca said, her voice hollow. The boy might still be alive. Sometimes they linger. Daniels and his remaining deputy followed Sarah and Rebecca downstairs to the kitchen. Rebecca retrieved a key from behind a loose brick in the fireplace and unlocked a heavy wooden door. The stench hit them immediately, copper and decay mixed with the sickly sweet odor of incense. Daniels covered his nose with a handkerchief as they descended the narrow stairs. The basement was larger than expected, extending beneath the entire house. Candles still burned in iron holders along stone walls, illuminating a space that resembled a perverted chapel. Wooden pews faced a central altar, a marble slab stained dark with years of use. My God, Daniels whispered, taking in the religious artifacts that lined the walls, crosses interspersed with symbols he didn't recognize. Sarah pointed to a small door in the far corner. There. That's where they keep them. Rebecca moved forward mechanically, retrieving another key from around her neck. I was never allowed to participate in the ceremony, but I knew. I always knew. Her voice broke. I tried to make their last days comfortable. She unlocked the door, revealing a small room with a child's bed, toys, and books, a mockery of a nursery. On the bed lay Michael Turner, his small body pale but his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He's alive, Daniels exclaimed, rushing to the boy's side. Rebecca nodded. Walter couldn't go through with it last night, not with the commotion at the church and Sarah missing. They sedated the boy and postponed until tonight. Daniels gathered Michael in his arms. The child was light, too light, and burning with fever. We need to get him to a doctor immediately. As they climbed the stairs, Daniels carrying Michael, the sound of gunshots echoed from outside. My men, Daniels said grimly. Sounds like they've encountered resistance. In the kitchen, they found one of Daniels's deputies waiting anxiously. Sheriff, it's chaos out there. Mills and his men arrived. They're exchanging fire with our boys. Get the women and the boy to safety, Daniels ordered. Take them to the church. It should be empty and defensible. What about father? Sarah asked. My men will secure him. Right now, saving this child is our priority. The deputy led Rebecca, Sarah, and Daniels with Michael through a side door, skirting the gunfire at the front of the property. They ran across open ground toward the church, bullets splintering wood around them. Inside the church, Daniels laid Michael on a pew. Barricade the doors, he instructed, helping the deputy push heavy furniture against the entrances. Rebecca cradled Michael's head, whispering soothing words. Will he live? Sarah asked, her voice small. If we get him proper medical care soon. Daniels peered through a window. Your father claimed the boy had tuberculosis. Is that true? Rebecca shook her head. No. They tell the families their children are dying to make the choice easier. Sometimes Dr. Harris administers small doses of poison over weeks to create symptoms. Daniels's expression hardened. How many people in town know about this? The elders' 12 families who've been here since the beginning. Maybe 30 people total. Rebecca stroked Michael's forehead. The rest suspect something, but don't ask questions. Prosperity is a powerful silencer. Gunfire outside intensified. Through the windows they could see Sheriff Mills and several men advancing toward the church. They'll kill us all to keep this secret, Rebecca said calmly. It's happened before. Daniels checked his ammunition. Not this time. A voice called from outside. Daniels, send out the boy and the women and you can ride out of here. Sheriff Mills, Daniels muttered, as if I'd trust the word of a child murderer. The deputy looked nervous. Sir, we're outnumbered. Maybe not for long. My other men went for reinforcements from nearby farms. Daniels positioned himself by a window. We just need to hold out. A shot shattered the colored glass above them, raining shards onto the pews. Sarah screamed, covering Michael with her body. "Get down," Daniels ordered, returning fire. The standoff continued for nearly an hour. Sporadic gunfire, demands for surrender, tense silence. Michael drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing labored. "He needs water," Rebecca said. Sarah hurried to the baptismal font, returning with a dampened handkerchief to moisten the boy's lips. Suddenly, the shooting outside intensified. New voices joined the fray. Daniels risked a glance through the window and smiled. "Reinforcements. And they brought the Greenville doctor." Within minutes, the gunfire ceased. A voice called out, "Sheriff Daniels? It's Lieutenant Parker from the state militia. Area secure." They cautiously removed the barricades. Outside, several of Ellerton's prominent citizens lay dead or wounded. Sheriff Mills was among those in custody, his face a mask of defiance. The Greenville doctor rushed to Michael, examining him quickly. "He's been drugged, but I believe he'll recover. We should get him to my practice immediately." As Michael was carried to a waiting wagon, Judge Perry arrived with more militiamen. His face was grim as he surveyed the scene. "We found more evidence," he told Daniels. "Records in the sheriff's office detailing payoffs to families, and a root cellar behind Dr. Harris's house containing various poisons." Sarah approached them hesitantly. "What happens now?" Judge Perry looked at her with compassion. "A full investigation. Trials for those involved. Your testimony will be crucial, Miss Mason. And my mother? She saved the boy's life. That will count in her favor." Rebecca stood nearby, watching as her husband was carried out of the mansion on a stretcher, militiamen at his side. Her expression was one of profound relief mixed with sorrow. "It's over," she whispered to Sarah. "After all these years, it's finally over." The trials began in September. Moved to Atlanta to ensure impartiality. 13 defendants faced charges ranging from conspiracy to first-degree murder. Walter Mason, Sheriff Mills, Dr. Harris, Judge Collier, and 9 other Ellerton elders. Thomas Webb, fully recovered from his wound, sat in the courtroom each day, supporting Sarah as she testified. The proceedings drew national attention. Newspapers from as far as New York and Chicago sent reporters to cover what they called the Covenant of Blood. Rebecca Mason testified against her husband, describing years of complicity through silence. "I told myself I was protecting the children in their final days," she said, her voice barely audible in the hushed courtroom. "But I was really protecting myself." Walter, pale and diminished since his injury, refused to show remorse. "What we did preserved Ellerton," he insisted on the stand. "Since we stopped the sacrifice, crops have failed. Sickness has returned. And yet no children have died," Thomas pointed out when he testified. The prosecution presented the leather-bound record book as evidence, along with financial documents showing how the Mason family had profited from the arrangement, acquiring land from grieving families, consolidating wealth and power in Ellerton for generations. Its most shocking to the public was the testimony of several parents who had surrendered their children over the years, believing them to be terminally ill. "Harris told us Jimmy had consumption, would suffer terribly before the end," one father testified, breaking down. "Said the ceremony was a blessing, would ease his passing and provide for our other children." Michael Turner, fully recovered, remained with relatives in Savannah, spared the trauma of testifying. His parents faced charges of their own for conspiracy but received reduced sentences in exchange for testimony. On the trial's final day, Thomas sat with Sarah in the courthouse garden. "Will you return to Ellerton?" he asked. She shook her head. "Never. There's nothing for me there but ghosts. Your mother? She's arranged to sell Mason Hill, what's left of it, after restitution to the families. She'll move west, start fresh." Sarah plucked a leaf, twirling it between her fingers. "I've been offered a position at a girls' school in Charleston. A chance to study, eventually teach." Thomas nodded approvingly. "You'll make an excellent teacher. What about you, Reverend? Will you continue in the ministry after ... everything?" "I believe I'm needed now more than ever," Thomas said, "though perhaps not in Ellerton." The verdicts came that afternoon. Walter Mason and 5 others received death sentences for first-degree murder. Dr. Harris, Sheriff Mills, and Judge Collier would serve life imprisonment. The remaining defendants received varying sentences based on their involvement. Rebecca Mason, in recognition of her actions to save Michael Turner, received 5 years, with likelihood of early release. As Walter was led away, he looked directly at Sarah. "You've doomed them all," he said coldly. "Remember that when the children start dying again?" Sarah turned away, refusing to meet his gaze. "The only doom was the one you created," she replied. "It's over, Father." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Thomas guided Sarah through the crowd to a waiting carriage. "Was justice served today?" a reporter shouted. Thomas paused. "Justice for the victims, yes. But there's a deeper reckoning still to come for a community that chose prosperity over morality, that allowed evil to flourish in silence." The story of Ellerton faded from headlines within weeks. replaced by other sensations. The town itself withered without its patriarchs, many residents abandoning their homes rather than face the shame of association. Mason Hill stood empty, its basement sealed by state authorities. The church where Thomas had briefly preached found no replacement minister, its congregations scattered. By year's end, only a handful of families remained in Ellerton, clinging to farms and businesses increasingly difficult to maintain. Some whispered that Walter had been right, that the town's decline proved the Covenant's power. But no more children disappeared in June. No more midnight prayers echoed from basement windows. The cycle that had sustained Ellerton's unnatural prosperity for generations was broken forever. 5 years later, Thomas Webb stood on the platform of Charleston's busy train station, watching passengers disembark from the Atlanta line. He spotted her immediately, Sarah Mason, now 21, dressed in the simple but elegant attire of a schoolteacher. "Reverend Webb," she greeted him with a warm smile. "Or should I say professor now?" Thomas returned the smile, taking her valise. "Thomas, please. I've left the ministry behind." They walked through the crowded station, catching up on the years since the trial. Thomas had indeed left the church, finding his calling instead in teaching history at the College of Charleston. His focus, the role of superstition in isolated communities. "And your mother?" he asked as they boarded a streetcar, released last year. "She's in California now, remarried to a widower who knows nothing of her past." Sarah looked out the window at the passing city. "She writes monthly. Seems happy, finally." They arrived at a small restaurant near the harbor, taking a table with a view of the water. After ordering, Sarah opened her handbag, removing a newspaper clipping. "Have you seen this?" she asked, sliding it across the table. Thomas adjusted his spectacles to read the small print. The headline was understated: "Former Georgia Town Abandoned." The brief article noted that Ellerton had been officially removed from state maps, its remaining buildings reclaimed by forest, its cemetery the only evidence it had ever existed. "Not surprising," Thomas said, returning the clipping. "Without the covenant binding them together, there was nothing to sustain the community." "There's more." Sarah hesitated. "I visited last month before the teaching term began. I felt I needed to see it one last time." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That must have been difficult. The house is still there, though, crumbling. I went inside." She lowered her voice. "The basement door was open, Thomas. The seal broken. Vandals, most likely. Curiosity seekers drawn by the legends." Sarah shook her head. "There were fresh candles. And in the book room where they kept Michael and the others before him, I found this." She withdrew something wrapped in cloth from her bag. Thomas unwrapped it carefully. A small wooden figure, crudely carved in the shape of a child. A doll, an effigy. Father spoke of them once. How in years when no suitable child could be found, they would create these as temporary measures. Her hands trembled slightly. "Someone is trying to revive the covenant." Thomas studied the figure with academic detachment. "Who? Everyone involved is dead or imprisoned." Not everyone knew every detail, but many in Ellerton suspected the truth. When the town failed, some may have decided to continue the tradition elsewhere. Sarah leaned forward. "There have been reports, children disappearing in small towns across Georgia, always in June." "Sarah," Thomas said gently, "children go missing tragically often. It doesn't mean 3 counties, 3 children, 3 Junes." Her eyes held the same intensity he remembered from their escape 5 years earlier, all in places where former Ellerton residents resettled. Thomas fell silent, considering. "Have you taken this to the authorities? With what evidence?" "A wooden doll and newspaper reports of missing children." Sarah shook her head. "They would think me hysterical, still traumatized by my father's crimes." "And why come to me?" "Because you believed me before when no one else would. And because you have connections now, academic colleagues, journalists who respect your work." Sarah reached across the table, gripping his hand. "The covenant is spreading, Thomas, like a disease. We have to stop it again." Thomas looked down at the crude effigy. He had built a new life, one of rational inquiry and scholarly respect. Investigating rural disappearances based on Sarah's suspicions risked everything he'd worked for. But the memories returned unbidden: Michael Turner's feverish face, the basement altar, Walter Mason's cold certainty. Some evils, once witnessed, created an obligation that could not be denied. "We'll need more evidence," he said finally. "Concrete connections between the disappearances and former Ellerton residents." Relief flooded Sarah's face. "I've already begun collecting information." She produced a small notebook from her bag. Names, dates, locations. As they bent their heads together over her research, a passing waiter noticed the wooden effigy and crossed himself surreptitiously. Outside the restaurant windows, storm clouds gathered over Charleston Harbor and somewhere to the west. In small towns with new names but old beliefs, Summer approached once again. This was only the beginning. The darkness continues in part 2. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.